The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, bringing you the 10th collection of website entries from the 2021 Orchestration Challenge. So these are website subscribers who have sent in entries of the first section of Andaluza by Manuel de Falla. And there will be 6 more to come. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Actually, this is a really comfortable tunnel, and I don't want to come out. But eventually, I will have to get back to everything else that I was doing, both for the community and for my career. So while I'm at it, I intend to enjoy myself down here. It's nice and dark, and they give me lots of chocolate. So let's just go forward into this entry right here from Daniel. Very exciting, very, very fun. There's some great ideas in here. And I'm always just so happy when I see things that I did not think about and that are really useful and work really well. However, before we leap into this, let's just talk about a few things. One is the use of the harp. Things are just so loud here. You're not really going to hear the harp. The harp does not have much of a chance against trumpets, and then xylophone. Xylophone tends to absorb the sound of the harp. It's almost like having piano playing along at the same time as the harp. You might hear like a little bit of a, you might hear the harp more in the phasing than you hear in the actual tone and attack of its own, right? It's just really overwhelmed by the sound. And a xylophone almost has kind of a mega piano kind of an attack and so on. So, other than that, it is pretty much working. There are one or two other little things. Here you have a flutter tonguing for your first trumpet on a high C. So high Cs, you just really have to be careful about how you approach for any brass instrument that, like mostly horns and trumpets. Writing in that high C, it's just, the lips are already really, really compressed, and it's just really adding a lot to it. It's kind of insane to throw in that high flutter tongue. Now, there's some players who can growl and flutter all the way up to G above of that and higher. I mean, I heard John Faddis once play trumpet and take it all the way up to the top C of a piano, and but like, this is concert music, right? Not jazz. So I would say, you could get the same effect that you're looking for an octave lower. Right? Just score it an octave lower. The overtones would do the work. And if you're really worried about it, you can have maybe your second flute player play flutter tonguing above as well. And look, you've already got, some tremolo alongside that with your second violins and so on. So, I mean, you could be playing The second violins could be playing divisi thirds here, along with some support from like maybe second flute or something, and then with this an octave lower, I think you would get a fuller sound, and you get that sort of very insane, brassy, twisty, buzzy kind of sound. Now, there are some dropouts, like you have the bump up 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 bum, and then you just stop, right? It's kind of cool though. I mean, yeah, I think the thing I question is like if you're pushing if you're only going up to forte with everybody else here, and you're pushing your trumpet to fortissimo, then and you're just leaving this huge gap, right? You'll feel like the listener will feel the drop off very markedly. It's like yeah, bum 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 bum. Oh, and by the way, da 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 da. It's like it's not the strongest way to follow through, right? Okay, so now let's talk about the overall scoring using the evaluation criteria. All right, so pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, not a concern because you have such full scoring. Maybe the scoring is too full, right? Because when we look at our next criteria is thematic material repeats often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the same exact way twice, right? So you pretty much take the same approach 4 times in a row with a few little changes. Like, you sort of changed around like from triangle to hand cymbals, and you've got like this little, big or little, this big flutter tonguing way up high here, and maybe that is not going to work anyway. But so there are a couple little changes, but like just overall, it really is kind of the same thing twice. So, what if you eased off at the beginning and then came in fuller at the end? Now, this is kind of an interesting way to say the same thing twice, right? You've got the bracket for non-divisi, and then you've got the words non-divisi. So one or the other. Just say non-divisi. Don't worry about the bracket. The bracket is kind of confusing. Yeah, here is a good use of subito. There was a question in the last entry of the last collection about the proper place to use subito. Like here, it makes sense because you're going along at fortissimo, and then suddenly you want to drop down. Which, by the way, in normal situations that didn't involve the trumpets blasting away and the xylophone at the same time, would actually make stuff like this on the harp more feasible. Not as feasible as you think, but a little bit more. I love this right in here. This that's really really cool. So just talking about the scoring in general, it works pretty well. I love the horns and the lower brass working together. And then, of course, you got your trumpets showboating as they should with the xylophone and the other instruments here. But my favorite part right in here are these trills. And you've got this interesting notation right in here. Wow, that's hard to read for my horrible eyesight, but basically just trilling on both parts, right? I mean, normally if I wanted to trill from both parts, I would actually have 2 different voices with a trill above and a trill below. So I think that just is better. And then if there are any like ways that the trills are different in terms of like, maybe one would be a half step trill and then would be a whole step trill, with different sharps and flats on them, then you would mark them at the different trill styles. All right, so now let's talk about melodic development soaring quite high to the uppermost orchestral register. I like this. I like the fact that the oboes are doing their part here. Bum 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 bum, and the strings are above it. That's a very rich sound. And then dun 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 dun, and then right in here, like the flutes are coming in. That's all right. They're crescendoing, but like once again, like you're dropping out on your oboes. That will really be felt, right? And then you have the piccolo coming in and sort of soaring over the top. What's wrong with the second violin, or excuse me, what's wrong with the first violin just continuing on with this line here, right? Just going to the D and then continuing on. Then the overtones of both the first and second violins on the same part contribute to the sound of the piccolo on top, right? And of course, the problem though being is that the xylophone, when you've got the xylophone in there, it just really takes over everything, and all the beauty of what's underneath it can easily get buried, right? You notice even in composers that are really fond of the xylophone, like say Prokofiev, a lot of times he'll use the xylophone in ways that aren't constant, like they don't have like so much, like we've got here, like they're just like a note here and a note there, and it kind of highlights certain things in the music without dominating it too much. And then of course other times it just dominates. So I would just say, think about the consequences of using a very active xylophone part. What does that subtract or add to the music? And then continuing on, yum bum 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 bum. We have sort of the same approach as before, right? So I'm happy with all of that. If you are happy with the xylophone being as prominent as it is, and the harp is just kind of invisible right there with the xylophone and the trumpets and everybody else working at such a loud volume. And once again, there's no need for the for the violin to just stop here. The first violins could continue on, giving more weight. The first violins giving more weight to the second violins just by continuing to double there. All right, so now let's talk about the accompaniment patterns, right? And I like your alternate idea of what the accompaniment pattern should be, right? Just as shown here with the staccato, that's such a cool idea. And then like that little bass line from below. The one thing I would say watching out about these bass lines, like their tendency to sort of pace the music, right? And especially here, right? And we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, just, do we want that ba 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 ba? Do we want that minuet kind of a rhythm in this kind of fandango style piece? I mean, it's not a proper fandango, but you get the idea. That like there's a lot of motion upwards on top, and you sort of leaping and hopping around, which you're bringing that out right in there really beautifully in the violas and the clarinets. So do we want the kind of motion from below in bassoons and lower strings? All right, I mean, it does work with the way that you conceived kind of the mass of this passage, so I'm not saying to change it, but always think of alternatives and, or what is the effect of the music overall. All right, now, right in here, I love the way that this is working. However, I am wondering a little bit about the phrasing here, and we'll talk about that as we get to it. So you're coming to an end here with this phrase, ending on the first beat. That's beautiful. And then, dun, dun, dun. And then here, the phrasing is beautiful. Dun. And that's great. Or you could go dun, dun if you wanted to. But now, when you get to here, with the other instruments, you start phrasing 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, and 3. But the actual phrasing is 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, right? So you're kind of forcing these, like this phrase, to kind of dovetail unnaturally into a new conception of this, right? So like you've established by doing what I feel is the correct way of phrasing these motives, like you have what I would consider to be the correct conception here, the 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1 idea, right? So you've got the 2 and 3 and then you dovetail into 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and, right? So where does Falla say to put the accent? Both on the end of the little motive and then on the beginning of the next one, right? So, but you're taking the accent away, right? And even just articulating the beginning of this slur here and then not articulating it there, I feel sets up something kind of unnatural in the music, right? I mean, wouldn't it be cool if you went boom and then started the slur here right? And then not slurring into the downbeat there. And then the slur in this part was from here to there, right? Anyways, it's just a thought. And I really love the big rolls here. See, this will work out great, but make the rolls bigger. Add more notes. Make it a really, really full, big, beautiful, billowing chord, right? You know, ba 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 da 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 dum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum, right? And once again, you know, you're subconsciously perhaps seeing where the emphasis of the phrasing is here rhythmically, right? It's right there on that second beat. So I would just say, just fix this up a little bit, move that, you know, move these slurs over, or just like move the start of this one to here and maybe get rid of this one. Now, this is nice. Right in here, you got this yep, up, 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 and then hand off to the clarinets. Really, really fun. And also dropping to other members. And so it's actually, this is the kind of thing where, like, because the violas have a different sound from the violins, you will really feel that trade-off as you add the clarinets to it. It's not just the clarinets, though. It's the fact that the violas have a slightly different sound, right? At least, and which becomes more and more pronounced. So, I mean, I see what you're trying to do here, but just be aware that, like, that trade-off is very, very obvious, right? It's, you know, it's not a subtle situation where one turns into the next, right? And if you wanted that kind of a sound, then possibly the best way to manage that would be to have the violas and cellos come in a little earlier, and then crescendo into it, and this would diminuendo out. And the same thing, have the clarinets come in a little earlier, and then have, like at pianissimo, and then have them crescendo forwards into this, and then you would get a beautifully smooth transition from upper strings to middle strings. So once again, pizzicato down here, staccato for the bassoons. Do you want that to be that paced? You know, there's a certain freedom in the original piano score. You know, just like it just keeps on going. But you know, do we really want it to be bumpa bapa 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 bapa? Do we really want the, you know, da 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 da? Right? Do we want that to really know where each beat is, as opposed to just, you know, a little child running free on the grass is kind of how I sort of see this, is, you know, or just like, you know, or somebody dancing in some beautiful ballroom or little cantina or something like that, and they're just running all over the place, and they're just about to leap into the arms of their beloved, right at the end of the phrase. So, you know, rather than people stomping along, right? So I would say with the pacing, you end up with solidity, but you trade off the freedom, right? But, you know, other than all of those little caveats, I would say this is really, really fun and really nicely done. And there's just so many fun ideas. I like the tambourine and the triangle working together. And, you know, I like the idea of the timpani right in here, just really bashing along, and then you backing off with your bass line to, you know, just this softer mezzo forte, pizzicato, and so on. You know, I like, in principle, I like the idea of the first trumpet flutter tonguing, but maybe not on a high C, right? And I love the idea of trading off, like, you know, you got trills, and then you've got tremolo and rolls, right? And then same thing here, you've got trills, and then you've got tremolo and rolls and flutter tonguing, I'd say, but, you know, you don't need it to be on high C. And, you know, there'll be a trumpet player out there watching this on YouTube who will say, I can flutter tongue on a high C. In fact, for me, it's easier to flutter tongue on a high C. And I would say, you know, bless you, my child. I completely approve of your desire to flutter tongue up there. I just don't know that many pro concert players who would like to do that. Or, you know, I mean, probably everybody could squeak that out who was playing professionally, but, you know, would it be all that musical, and would they want to, and what would that do to their embouchure for the rest of the piece, right? It's just that I don't have that kind of specialized knowledge, and if you're going to do something like this, just really kind of consult with a player and see if that's what they want to do, or if they can make it work musically. So, having said all those things, this is a delightful beginning to this set of evaluations. Really, really liked it, and I really loved how really clear everything was, and how, how easy you made it for me to give you the feedback that I needed to give to you, Daniel. It's really excellent to get that in a score. So with that really fun beginning, let's just say thank you to Daniel for a great entry, and thanks to everybody watching this. And we're right here at the beginning of the video, so I'll say, just like I did in the previous one, I would really, really love it if everybody who has got a score being evaluated by me in this video would comment on each other's entries. That would be fantastic. It would be wonderful to hear what Daniel thought about all of the other scores, and have their constructive feedback, or even just like a helpful comment, or just something that you liked about somebody's entry. Even if it was just one little note played by one little instrument, you might say, wow, I love the way the timpani came in on, bar 16, that kind of thing. So everybody, please comment on each other's scores. And now, with that, I am going to go comment on the next score. And now for Jose's score. And I have to say, this is another really exciting, very vivacious score. And I think there are a lot of things I can help you with here, Jose. And, first thing that we're going to talk about is the role of celesta and harp. Now, if you were listening along to that mock-up, you could probably hear that, you could just really barely hear the harp, and you can barely hear the celesta in there, right? And even with the less instruments playing right in here, it still just did not stand out very much. Even with just like the second violin and first violins playing together, it just doesn't really quite, didn't quite add very much to the sound picture. So what your mock-up is telling you is exactly what is going to happen. The problem is that the celesta is one of the softest instruments in the orchestra. Its loudest sound is about mezzo piano, right? So compared to the rest of the orchestra. So like a fortissimo on a celesta is about mezzo piano. And, say mezzo forte is about piano for the rest of the orchestra. So it's really a soft instrument. Now, a lot of times we hear celesta that has had a microphone added to it, just a little bit of amplification, especially in situations like a movie soundtrack, right? It's being boosted in the mix, and that you would really need that here if you wanted the celesta to really contribute. And I just it kind of breaks my heart to say that, because your conception here is not a bad one, right? It's just that you're using the wrong instrument. The proper instrument to use here would be glockenspiel, right? It would just sound, you could get a lot of this to sound the right way, the way that you conceive of it in your head. And of course, you wouldn't be able to play these big chords on it, but you would be able to get a lot of, at least the top line, the top staff would be possible on a glockenspiel. It'll end up being scored an octave lower. I'm trying to think. Yeah, you could get all the way down to A sharp. So that would be. I mean, but it would end up being very silvery and jangly, right? If everything else is balanced so that you can hear it. Now, the next thing that it really breaks my heart is to tell you that even though you worked out a lot of pitches in here and harmonically so that you could have more strings playing and more, just twice as much strength from your harp as you might expect. And it's such a beautiful idea. The problem is that scoring for high horns like this, and for massive orchestra, and for cymbals, going tish, 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 and the whole fortissimo dynamic, basically just blows the harp out of the water. Using pizzicato here, the pizzicato doubling of the same pitches. The pizzicato is much, much stronger than the harp. You will barely hear or not hear the harp here. Right? So I just hate to say that. I hope this isn't crushing for you, Jose, because, I understand what you're trying to do here. But, to what extent is this doubling kind of unnecessary? Like, you are covering those pitches with pizzicato, right? Maybe if the pizzicato were doubled, not with harp, but with instruments that are just sitting around doing nothing, more or less, like if you had your English horn more engaged, or oboes, and bass clarinet doubling these parts in here, and with nice staccatos, then you would just get a much pointier and more effective kind of leaping around kind of an accompaniment. And the same thing here. I like the percussion, just don't have any problem with it. It's very, very, very full. So having said those things, I just hope you're not too disappointed. Just think about harp being really useful when the texture is very soft and subtle. That's when it is at its strength. If you want to score harp during loud passages, think of big rolls, big huge rolled chords. Glissando works really, really well. If you have more of the weight in the lower register of the orchestra, sometimes the harp can stand out above, playing figuration and other kinds of things. Still hard to hear, but not a complete waste. But it just, both of these instruments, it just hurts my heart to say this, that they're not that effective or audible. Okay, so now let's move on to what is working with your score, and some caveats and so on, and talking about the evaluation criteria. So starting off with pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano score, it is not an issue here. You are filling out the scope. Now, one thing I do have a slight problem with here is this. It's really hard to see, so I'm going to enlarge the score here. Is the use of these harmonics here, and the problem is that even though these harmonics do work and they will result in pitches that are usable, they may not work at fortissimo. Like they might not contribute much to the sound picture. And the same thing is true of like pushing your bassoons up into the ceiling here. So like, I think this is meant to be tenor clef. Hang on. Let's correct this, all right? Shall we? All right. So we can see that the bassoons are, I'm not sure if this is meant to be A2. You didn't go through and tell me, you didn't mark the entrances, but I'm going to assume that everything is A2, all right? For all instruments that can double. But that should never be a default that you count on in your final score, all right? So always mark how many instruments are playing a single line when you've got two on a staff. Okay, so here you're asking this really high B from the bassoonist, and they can play it all day long, but is there any sense in them playing it with the trombones on top of them, right? At forte, you could have two trombones playing this B up here, and you could have like six bassoons playing that B up there, and they could not sound as loud as those trombones, right? So that's the first thing, like how useful, like is there nothing that the bassoons could have done lower, right? Is there nothing that the bass clarinet could have done lower in a place where it's stronger? And here you have so much strength on that B. I mean, when you think about it, you've got your trombones on the B, you got your second trumpet sitting on that B, you've got all four horns are playing A2 or R4, I should say. They're all playing on that B, right? So they are just really sitting on that B. So the second clarinet right in here is not going to be heard, and neither are these oboes, right? So it feels to me like the harmony in here is kind of underpowered. You've got the G sharp right in here, but we're not really hearing the E very strongly, right? And we got the G sharp in the violas in treble clef here. So yeah, I'm I'm just a little dubious about asking those low instruments to play those high Bs when there is just so much power sitting on the B. But I like this here. You got that done. That's nice. The clarinets and the oboes and everybody, right? It might feel a little underpowered, like with just a huge strength that you've got here. You know, this is the hammer of Thor, right? And this is Loki laughing at him, right? so, so you know, it just might need a little bit more. You know, even if it were like maybe first trumpet playing yada da da right there, or maybe you can figure out some other way of scoring this and have the second violins play the octave lower, right? There just feels like it needs to be a little bit more strong right in here in the answering, you know, the little reply, the little response to the call. So, yeah. Now, so the next issue that we are bringing up is like thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated exactly the same way twice. You essentially do orchestrate this exactly the same way twice, and nearly like the same way for each 2-bar motive, right? So I would say, like, is there any way that you can possibly, like, maybe hold off on some of the strength at the beginning and then bring in even more crushing strength at the end? Like, maybe you could just drop some of the weight here and then bring it back in, and then, you know, have more like timpani, and maybe have the trombones lower and the lower strings more in a register that is comfortable to them. Now, this is just really unusual right in here, but I will talk about this in its turn. But like scoring, like this could all be done in tenor clef, but then see you're running all the way up to E with your cellos, like really scoring high with everything. So, yeah, I mean you really are favoring the upper middle register of the orchestra, you know, like giving us a little bit of relief with the occasional timpani note. But maybe it doesn't need to be so, you know, so high all the time. Now, here you're asking for artificial harmonics from the double basses, and that's not really a thing that they like to do. They are possible, but it's kind of like snap pizzicato or some other kind of technique where you really have to sort of set it up, and it doesn't do well in massive kinds of scoring like this. And I mean, it's a kind of thing where there are so many natural positions. There's so many positions of natural harmonics possible on a double bass that they would just prefer to not do artificial harmonics. So yeah, so I would just say, like, it's just, you know, there are instruments that can do what the cello is doing up here in treble clef so much better. And the thing is that the use of the cello so high is not necessarily being highlighted in any way that is, you know, that is complementary to the cellists or to the cello section, right? You're having them just basically double the trumpets rushing up here. So what are you going to hear here is mainly the trumpets, and rather than the cellos, right? So the work that the cellist is doing in here is kind of wasted, right? So so like this could have been kept in tenor clef, just cut this run right in here, and then it just seems more reasonable. So, but I mean, having said that, there are a lot of cellists who prefer to read treble clef to tenor clef in general, so I'm not going to speak for them. But, you know, like right here, like here's where tenor clef would have been just really beautifully useful. All right. So let's focus on those other criteria. I know I'm kind of wasting a lot of time on teeny little bits, but let's talk about the. I've already discussed the accompaniment figures and the pizzicato, how maybe doubling them with winds rather than the harp would be a better way. And so I think that those are all, I think I've said enough about that. I would say back off, like with the use of the horns right in here are kind of touching on some of the same points as the accompaniment, and I think that they're getting to be too big for the pizzicato. So, you know, you don't need to accent everything. Take away the accents, give us some staccatos, drop the dynamic, Then you get a much better blend with your with the pizzicato right in here. All right, so continuing on with the melody, this is kind of strange. Yup, up, 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 and then notice that this drop right here is going to be huge, right? Because you're already going up to this high A in the piccolo, so the ear is going to expect going all the way up to D above the piano, right? So inside this, the violin has got less chance of being effective in terms of following through. And yeah, this is really going to be thin and spidery sounding way up, just like really penetrating. So I think that your best bet is to actually drop the piccolo down an octave and then have it follow through with this line. And yeah, you can have the violins do this. It's not that musical up there on that D and C. You could have them run up to A and then drop down to the D and C below and then jump back up to the A. And you don't need this ottava at all for those players, right? What I'm talking about is this. Like, normally, you should just score it like this, right? And then you could do something like this in the middle, right? You could have them go yeah da 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 da, right? Or even this. Right? You could do that. Or you could even drop this down, right? Just like this, right? But having the piccolo fulfilling part of that. Anyways, it's just, they're just different options. But I'd say whatever the option, just, don't bother with ottava for flutes and violins. They don't need it. Yeah, and this is just outrageously high for English horn, going all the way up to A. I would say don't take your English horn really above E. There's so many other instruments that are stronger, like the oboes, right? Maybe you could just even completely leave out the English horn right here, or give the English horn a role of supporting this with staccato, and don't overdo it. Don't overload this jumping down. All right, now here, once again, we have a problem of pushing the strings all the way up to kind of a slightly screechy register, and like here, you're also like very, very high with the piccolo, so you're sort of using up the novelty of this high register, right? So that like the extreme height of the piccolo, like it has already fulfilled that little slot in our brain, and then we have this line coming rushing up from below, and it ends up in the place where we already were, right? So maybe if the piccolo were dropped an octave, and then we had the feeling of it fulfilling this rush up to this E, right? Rather than using the E up already. Yeah, once again, it's just getting into way too high for your average English horn player. I would say, like, rarely go above C. Like, almost never go above C. Like, this, like, I mean, it's all possible, these D sharps and E's and stuff like that, but I mean, how musical are they? Like, how much better would they sound on oboe? Like I said before, these B's are going to just be blown out of the water by the huge weight of all four horns, second trumpet, and two trombones sitting on the same B, right? So it's almost like they might as well not even be there. It would be better to have the oboes used, and also the English horn, I would say, like doubling the E right in here and maybe the G sharp to kind of sweeten the tone of the first trumpet. All right, but that just kind of, yeah, in this case, I mean, there might be some English horn specialists that can go all the way up to high C, for all I know, but don't push your average English horn player above C most of the time. D and E if you really need it, but like F and above, just don't, right? But I would say just like adjusting that, like going up to E if you have to on your violins here, but keeping the piccolo down before then. And also here, just drop the piccolo part and then have them double this at what would be notated an octave lower, but go over the top, just like this does on its D, right? And like the celesta does. All right, now we get to here. Now this is just some screamingly high horn scoring, and like you're going all the way up to high C, and like there is nothing about this that is necessarily like unplayable, right? It's just really is using up the horn player, right? If you have something delicate like a beautiful horn solo and stuff, like, or you have some low playing coming up for these players, it's really going to hurt their lips because they're going to be really tight. And the sound isn't really all that great up there, you know. Like if you're just throwing it into this massive tutti and just like, yeah, throw it at the wall, right? I mean, there's nothing really remarkably unique about the horn timbre way up there. So I mean, I think that like if you've got trumpets, if you've got trombones that you're willing to push up, you know, I mean, you're willing to push those trombones all the way up to B, like maybe there's a way of using your trumpets and trombones in ways that give your horns a break. Seriously, right? So, you know, if you got these G thirds there, those are like C thirds for the your trumpet. So, like I would just say, just incorporate this into this, bum 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 ba da ba bum, right? And then just have your horns play an octave lower, and they will give the illusion that they are playing higher, right? And then you can sort of bulk it up a little bit with some trombone harmony and so on. But I mean, like the concept here, the phrasing, you know, I really love the way that this all works together with the flutes and I think that you know, if you're going to have trumpet here, you're going to have this triple octave of flutes. I think you need another line of strings as well. So, you know, even though you would think, well, they're going to be doubling the trumpet, maybe two trumpets as you designed or as you intended, but didn't tell me. So, but still, the string tone is really important to double at the octave with the other strings. So, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. So I think that would just be, you know, that would work maybe a little bit better right in there. And then, you know, just once again, you just rethink this, right? And these I mean, look, it's like really well intentioned, and it's you know, I mean, like I appreciate the level of craft that you're putting into this, and the, you know, the level of thought and so on. But like just the question is, does that work, right? Does it work to push the English horn all the way up there and so on, right? So you have to think about all these things. All right, then continuing on, and yeah, once again, if the celeste is really not going to add a whole lot and it can't really play an orchestral fortissimo, then you have to rethink the way that this is. You know, maybe if you have a glockenspiel player like I suggested, then you would be able to like incorporate that plus maybe something else into this line to give it the continuity that it needs in order to trade off between winds and strings and still have something carrying through all the way through, right? So I think that's like the best advice that I could give you without getting to be too much. And then also like it you know, give your English horn player a rest, right? Like, you know, bring them in places where like they can be more directly useful. I mean, here you're kind of using it to thicken the clarinet part, second clarinet part, and then we got, I'm not sure if this is one or two oboes plus flute, and then right in here, like, see, it you can just leave out the flute because it's not really contributing a lot, right? You're still at fortissimo, right? So that so with strings being loud and, you know, fortissimo, clarinet, crescendo, you're just not going to hear the flute right in here, right? You'll hear the oboes great, right? They'll come through, and the English horn right in here, I would say, is like, I mean, I guess this is all right. The use of the English horn right in here, that's fine. Yeah. I almost feel like there needs to be I almost feel like something needs to carry through in the winds right in here to really make it feel like for the continuity to feel, because like right in here you have winds and strings, and then you have winds or strings or winds, right? We're kind of going back and forth, and then both. So I almost wonder if there couldn't be just like one of the voices continuing on, even if it was just like one oboe player and one English horn player, or like maybe just the two flute players continuing on right in here, right, and then the rest of the ensemble coming back, and then not xylophone, but glockenspiel above. Anyway, I mean, there are a number. I mean, I don't want to take it apart and reorchestrate it for you right here on the spot, but those are just kind of ways that you can make your ideas more effective, right, and maybe less painful for the players to play, right? So like once again, just beautifully conceived, in terms of like what your intentions are. They're just fantastic and they're powerful. So like, how can we realize those? And I hope that I've given you a few suggestions and some thought about the use of these softer instruments in massive tutis. Okay, and then just with less focus on what these things can do and what key role that you think that they might have, you just completely take them out and replace them with instruments that are stronger. Then that can give more responsibility and maybe more reasonable ingenuity placed onto the other bits of scoring, the other parts of the orchestra, right? So anyways, great entry, really got me going and made me think a lot about certain things too, of my own orchestration. And I really do appreciate that. So thanks so much, Jose, for your really great score. And now, on to the next one. All right, Autumn. What a dramatic, cinematic score! It just, really it really does remind me of a film score. In fact, it just really feels like the opening credits. Just like I can almost like see the four Spanish pieces blazing across the screen as this starts. Right, maybe they could be four Spanish scenes or something like that to match the music. But yeah, so so there's a lot of stuff that works here really nicely. Just really an enjoyable listen on the mock-up, and there are a lot of things that work really, really well. I think there are some things I can help you with here in terms of making it even better. Some possible stuff you probably are already picking up on a little bit from listening to some of the other entries. So, let's talk about that harp. Okay, so I know everybody's dreading that, when I get to that point now. But what I would say is, here you're sort of using the xylophone as the xylophone and clarinets, staccato, to sort of be the proxy of the accompaniment and so on. And then you've got the harp as well. So here you've only got one single pitch of the xylophone to kind of compete and absorb and mess with the identity of the harp. You're bringing everybody's volume down here, and I really love that. The sort of flexing of the dynamics in here is very effective. And I love this like vibrato. That's really, really fun. But I think like right here, this has got a chance. You got a shot of having your harp audible here. But what you've got to add is, instead of just this little triad here, this meek little triad, you got to add a big, beautiful roll, a huge E major chord that starts at the bottom and just like ripples across the strings. So maybe like E octave and a fifth below, or maybe E low E and then B with the second, so like ring finger on the low E, and then pointer plucking the B, and then G sharp, and then like a big old octave chord here, E, and then rippling, and then the left hand comes in above, and just like that big huge chord, 3 or 4 octaves just split between the hands, and the same thing here, right? Just I think that you just have that chance of that harp to come through really strongly. Now here, like, you almost have a shot, except for the fact that you've got that right here with your trumpet. So forget it. That's just going to kill the harp. If it weren't for the fact that the fortissimo melody in upper strings and winds is already just going to absorb any resonance the harp has got to offer. And then of course, trying to play a chord on a fortissimo here, that's not going to work. Now here, this is lovely. This boom, plum, 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 plum. By the way, the markings, like if you do change this should be forte or even fortissimo against the mezzo forte of everybody else's. That'll bring some balance in. And then same thing here, it should be nice and strong. One last little note. You probably have heard me say this several times now, several dozen times now. You do not need to write in the individual pitches of the harp, right? That is an old style thing. It is really not a thing anymore. Just give us the endpoints. Give us the first note and the last note and the glissando line, and just don't worry about the rest of it, okay? Just, first note, last note, glissando line, and then the glissando, like so right here, you seem to be using the harp glissando plugin, right? But just, you don't need this, seriously. Just all you need is this, right? All you need is this. Dun, 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 dun. So just put in the harp pedal right there. Just the harp pedal setting, right? Because like this stuff, it's the same thing twice, right? So there isn't even any need for it again. So just the pedals are set it and forget it, right? Is what the harpist wants to think. They don't want to have to get out their glasses and read all these little pitches. All right. So, with all of that, all of those comments, let's talk about the actual scoring here, which is just really fun and, just kind of fantastic fun. One little thing I would caution against is this idea. Now, this might be something that you heard me lecturing on at length in the previous video, and I'll just comment that, like, if you look at the context of the piano score, Falla is asking the pianist to play the upper part of their hand on an E fifth, right? There's probably their second finger playing the E, their pinky playing the B, and then hitting their thumb on the B below. So the first accent is the grace note of those two upper notes coming in, and then the second accent is the thumb note coming in. Now you are accenting the principal note. However, like, if you have certain instruments coming in early and tying the grace note, it just really throws everybody else off, right? I mean, you could go da-dun, 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 but having them go da, 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 I mean, it just is a mind twist, right? It's really better to have these players going down, 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 down. So, just pick another pitch nearby and then slur into it, rather than having a tied grace note. Okay, it's just a weird thing for, I mean, it's possible, but it's just, it's a kind of a waste of time in rehearsal, and it doesn't really add very much to, to the kind of quality, the flavor of the piece. Just have other pitches do that kind of stuff, right? Or change the pitch of the grace note. I think that's something that I might have done. Okay. So, of our concerns, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, that's like you just threw that away. You threw away the using the piano score as a guide. You did your own thing, so that just doesn't even apply. Thematic material, repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive. So, like, the thing is, you did a bunch of little changes, right? So that's one thing. Even though really it's kind of reusing the same material, like the fluctuations of dynamics and color within each group was enough to make it not feel repetitive, even though it really is repeating, right, in a lot of ways. But you've got things like, I don't know if low flutter tonguing is really going to work as well as you think it is here. And the same thing with the horns. It just kind of has like sort of a crusty thing. I would say leave it to your lower strings. And, if you really want that kind of motion, maybe, yeah, I'm not so convinced, especially on this low contrabassoon flutter tonguing D. I mean, it'll work, but I mean, it's just really kind of an ugly sound, and especially like you're using it in two separate ways. Like you're using it to crescendo, to fortissimo, and then you're using it to diminuendo, right? So I think it's better just to have straight tones there, right? And yeah, to let the strings do the tremolo, I think is just a safer kind of a thing. All right, so just covering that scoring really briefly, it's just nicely done. You're keeping the weight above for your flutes. I think you forgot to mark A2 here, and yeah, just make sure that I know, or that the conductor knows how many. If you're going to share the same line, the same musical line or voice, then just write A2 above, right? So you might have your intervals and then go to A2, intervals, then back to A2. And that just, it's just like musical punctuation. It's sort of, or like almost like sentence building, right? Using plural instead of singular in a sentence. It's got that same amount of significance to a score reader. But I really love the low placement of the brass right in here. I think that's great. And then the bum, bum, and yeah, and the simplicity of that. I think like it does not really need any blum. I don't think you need that that sort of flutter tonguing swell. I'm not sure that it really informs the listener that much about like what the pitch information is, right? To not to be too blunt about it, but yeah, it's just kind of, it sort of doesn't make things any clearer. Though it will make things more exciting. So if that's the intention, then yeah, it's going to be very exciting. So yeah, so I just really love the way that this is all. I mean, like I said, cinematic. I mean, there's got to be a horse in this film. You know what I mean? And chaparral, and yeah, it just that just the imagery just really sparkles off of it, like with this this very dramatic kind of scoring. It's interesting that you held off on the glissandos, right? Like you waited to these moments rather than going pow, glissando, rim, like that. But I'm glad you didn't, right? And then just a touch of xylophone in there. Okay, so that takes us to the question of the accompaniment figures. We already kind of covered a little bit. They're not as strong as they could be, but you're trying to set up this kind of this sort of quasi waltz right in there, right? And so I'll give you a pass on that. I would say that maybe like some of these figures here, maybe doubled by lower winds at staccato, would kind of toughen them up a little bit as the waltz is playing right in here with the harp. I mean, right here, like you really want that harp to be audible, right? So I would just say like forte, molto forte right in here, and then just back everybody else off to very mezzo forte, and it just takes some of the accents off, and just try to cushion this a little bit so that the harp comes through beautifully, right? And I think you just have that even more momentum going through this phrase. Okay. So this is kind of interesting here. You got your English horn and yeah, and the trumpet in octaves and so on. So here you're pushing your concert trumpet player all the way up to that high D, right? So it might be better to have like a trumpet. I would say like just to have trumpet in D. You know, if you really have got to go up to that high D, or in E flat even, and that will give you the high D. But it's still it's not that it doesn't really automatically give you more pitches to use a higher trumpet. It's more that the weight of the register is higher. But man, I would just really love to hear that trumpet player hit that high note. Of course, you could just solve the entire problem by moving everything from E Phrygian down to D Phrygian, and then you get then you can pop out that high C. I mean, sure, like a trumpet player should be able to hit that high D, but it's sort of messing them up for other things that they're going to do down the road, right? It's just really just using up their lip. Especially if it's you're using like a concert player who focuses on different things, right? Maybe they're not a jazz player, but can a jazz player play the planets, right? Like play the trumpet part for the planets, right? It is really a kind of a different sort of a focus. So I just would say like you might have to give that one up, right? Like you might have to get into a situation where you're really relying on the integrity of the line on other players, and like you rush up to this and you get up to this A, and then you drop down a little and come back, but that'll be really obvious and audible, right? It's one of those things you can't get away using other players to shield you, because the sound of the trumpet is just so strident, and especially pushing it up to its top notes. If you sort of try to fudge with that, it will be audible. It isn't something you can just hide in the arc of all the other parts. And here you're sending your first flute player all the way up to that high D. It's not that musical, but you're doubling with piccolo, so you kind of get away with it. And it's not that it becomes piercing. And I've mentioned this on another video, but I'll mention it here as well. Like the high D on a flute isn't necessarily piercing, but it just doesn't have that really beautiful musical quality. And then you'd think like, well, if I go higher, will things get kind of more loud? And no, actually, kind of it starts to sort of get somewhat squelched. Like I've written a high D into a piccolo part, so like the D above the piano, and there was a kind of a sort of a breathy, sort of almost whispery, sort of choked sound to it, rather than like what you might expect a very piercing. Like if the high C on a piccolo is piercing, then the high D should be even more piercing. But no, it actually is somewhat sort of almost kind of wheezy. Not like the high D on a C trumpet. So I would just say, maybe if you really have to pop that one out, I would say just maybe have this part be on an E flat, right? I mean, you could write it for a D trumpet and it'll be played on an E flat anyway, so just write it for an E flat. Yeah. And I just really love this right in here. This dun dun dun, and then as you have this build, you have the dun 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 dun. That's so cool. All right. And then finally we're ending with a and I love that. Like you've got the actual mechanical interpretation of that high melody in your strings, and then you have this big rip with all of the other winds, and that works great. So here we have the piccolo and flute starting in kind of weaker registers, and usually I caution against that. But when it's part of like just an ongoing flow upwards, then it's fine, because it gives the player somewhere to start and then go up from. Right. So it's gotten my approval. That's fine. I think that you could get away with like 2 flute players on this rather than just one. All right. Now, here is another thing that I like a lot. Is, you end your phrase, boom, and then you come in really strong with just the brass, just trumpets and horns, bum bum bum, yeah da 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 dun. Yeah, I feel in this scoring, it should almost be like this line here, this upper line should actually be like the second, and this should be the fourth down here, right? Of course, this isn't a transposed score. Like here, I'm throwing in some transposition. So yeah, I guess third and fourth makes more sense. Yeah, it's just a little deceptive the way that it was scored. Yeah, but I mean, there could be possible ways of improving this and tweaking, but just leaving it alone, I think it works fine the way that it is. I mean, you could also have this played by the trombones as well, with and that might work even better in terms of like an overall sort of timbral homogeneity, right? So if that's really something that you want it to sound very much like a group of brass players playing, and there's like less difference between the timbres. However, combining horns and trumpets in this way gives it kind of a more golden sound, right? Whereas combining the trumpets and the trombones, so the trombones taking over these same parts, would give it a more just obviously brassy sound in the sense of the brass of the metallic sound of the brass. And this is really cool. Da 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 dum, and then this da 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 da, and like the way that you're managing these parts sort of dying away, carrying this forward, and that's all very very cool. It's just real. You're being very crafty here, Autumn, and that really shows. So, one thing I would say is, you have fulfilled one of my criteria about textural contrast of previous passage, right? So obviously, maintaining a driving staccato and transitioning smoothly to the next passage. So you haven't really thought about where you're going, right? But I would say diminuendo on these last bars, right? Because you're already at molto marcato fortissimo, right? So now here you're going up to almost triple forte, right? So back off, and then I would feel like this was really leading somewhere. Right, and the same thing, especially with like slamming away on these lower xylophone bars at fortissimo, at more than fortissimo, molto marcato, right? And so yeah, they're going to be using harder sticks, and it'll just be really really loud. So thinking ahead, right? I mean, it's a little difficult to do when you're not doing more in the piece, but I would say just bring it in a little bit, and then think about what you would do, right? And then that illusion gives me a chance. But so you know what to fix if you want to fix anything at all, right? And I mean, I just love certain things. I love certain problems about this that aren't so easy to fix, like that scorching high D right in there, and so on. I like the harp waltz right in here. I think it's very cool. So anyhow, I mean, I hope that any of that is helpful to you. But it's a great score, really energizing, and it is just propelling me forward into the evaluation of the next selection. So thank you very much, Autumn, for sharing that with me. And now let's take a look at the next entry. That's very, very cool, Talia. I really enjoy the simplicity of it, the directness of it, and I love how it's very, very string based. There are a bunch of things I think I can help you with here, But I think the first thing that I should talk about with you, you probably can hear in the background that I am setting up my computer. I think I can help you with a few things, especially in your harp scoring here. So, one of the problems with very, very loud passages and harp is that the harp really has a hard time being heard. It's a very soft instrument. Now, you might think, well, all I have here is just xylophone and flute family instruments and the strings, so shouldn't the harp come through here? Well, the harp does have a chance, except for the fact that you have so much pizzicato, right? So the sound of the pizzicato tends to absorb the sound of harp. And, to be perfectly frank about it, here you have scored pitches in the harp that are, they're very sparse, right? You just have one or two notes at any given time playing in either hand. And against the pizzicato, these big rolled chords that you have, the harp will just get absorbed. Now, if you had huge rolls on the harp, it would help, but it would still it would still have a tendency to get absorbed into the strings. And, the other problem, too, is xylophone tends to absorb the sound of the harp as well, right? Because they're similar sounds. They're sounds that have a percussive attack, and then, then like a little bit of a sustain afterwards, right? So the xylophone is really just the master in that category. I noticed that you have sort of put the xylophone in the background here to try to get it to blend with the winds and so on, and the upper strings, but it's still, it'll still damage the any chance the harp has to be very loud. Now here, you are dropping to mezzo piano, and then you've got your piccolo playing solo, kind of loud. I feel like this is, you still sort of have a problem. You can hear it in the mock-up, can't you? That the harp is really getting absorbed into the pizzicato of the strings. Now here, this is kind of interesting. The more arco you add to your strings, the more you can hear the harp, right? So I think you just need to decide which one you're going to favor, right? You can't have both. You have to either have harp in here, just beautifully, kind of running through these lovely accompaniment patterns, or you have to have your pizzicato strings realizing the same thing. I think this is very strong, by the way, the English horn doubling the accompaniment. But I will talk about that as I go through the different evaluation criteria in a minute. So jumping to the next page here, and just focusing strictly on the harp. Right in here, if you were to make these big gushing chords, not 3-note or 4-note harmony, four-part harmony, but if you were to really make it like big chords in either hand, 3 or 4 notes in each chord and big rolls across, then you would really be able to hear the harp beautifully. So having said all that, let's focus just on the evaluation criteria now. So there is a concern that I raised in my own orchestration about the pitch weight of the original piano score being in the upper middle register, and if we completely transcribe that onto the orchestra, what are we missing in terms of the fullness of texture that we could get out of the orchestra? So, here and there you are thinking about it and making things a little bigger, but for the most part you're keeping things restricted to that higher range. I love this little timpani stroke right here. I think that that's very, very important. So what I would say is don't be afraid to expand the sound picture. You do not have to be limited to exactly what is in the piano score. And I mean, and here you can see in the cellos you're getting lower than the piano score, and that's good. And of course, so is the timpani stroke right in here. That's also lower than the piano score, but could you be expanding things even more? That's the question. And then we have the further concern that in one of my what I've written down in the evaluation criteria, the thematic material repeats often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the same way throughout, right? So not just the same way in this group and this group, but the same way in each two-bar motive, right? Are they always the same? So what could be done to make it feel like there was an expansion? Now here you're sort of answering that question by adding timpani, right? But you have all these instruments at your disposal, right? Could you be bringing in more lower heavy brass, maybe more horns in the middle to kind of expand things a little bit? Could you be bringing in more of the wind section to bulk up this idea? Could you be changing from pizzicato to arco? So those are all questions worth asking, right? It's not that your orchestration is bad or lacking or anything like that. It's just it's just a set of questions that is worth thinking about, right? For any orchestrator, I would say. Now, here you have this kind of interesting thing. You've got a pizzicato harmonic. And so you're producing this pitch, right? So this would be the pitch that you would be playing. So you would get that actually on the E string, on the fourth string of a standard double bass. And it's actually fairly soft. So you've got this big ripping pizzicato here, and you've got this big thump on the timpani, and that will tend to bury whatever the double bass player is playing here, right? So it's just that harmonic sound is not very loud, and you don't tell us what dynamic this is either, right? Is it intended to be fortissimo like everybody else? In which case I would say at the most it's going to sound mezzo forte, so it doesn't really have much of a chance. I really love the way that you were balancing this here, right? You're saying this is forte, this is forte, right? Do not overdo the percussion right in here. I would like the sound of the winds and the strings to come through. That's great. But as I said before, like the harp is just not in this balance. It is not getting the best part of the bargain, right? So how can you make your harp sound bigger, right? There are ways of having the harp sound clearer in a loud passage, but they're kind of limited, like big, huge rolled chords. We talked about a glissando, but that gets to be a cliche after a while. The harp playing patterns, maybe over the top of the music. So all of those are things that have a chance of competing, right? Or you can just completely change the entire philosophy of what you're doing, make it about the harp, and score the harp really generously, but then everything that is playing along with it has to be way softer. So I would say just maybe leave the harp out of these big, huge gestures, but you can include it in places like this, but you have to simplify the sound picture. All right, well, I won't get stuck on that, hopefully. Let's go back to the criteria. The next two concerns are the melodic development soaring quite high and the accompaniment figures covering a wide range. Now here, let's talk about the accompaniment figures once again. Here the English horn does beautifully with these staccatos, and I think that the English horn and the harp could actually carry this and then just pull back a little bit on the pizzicato. Maybe just have these cello pizzicati here, and maybe these little octaves in the violins, and then let allow the harp to play this, and I would say score this a little bit more generously. If there's a way of making this a little fuller, including the notes that are being doubled by the English horn, but even maybe a little bit more, then you could hear some harp, and you could still, you could really salvage the section. Right in here, there's one little concern as well. I'd say go back to bass clef here. It's not that cellos cannot read this, but it's just that I think they would prefer to read it in bass clef rather than tenor clef. It's just, if you're going to be sitting around at the bottom of the staff, you might as well just go back to bass clef, because really it is a bass register. It's a bass register passage, whereas this is a tenor register passage. It's perfectly, it's something that is in the tenor range, and it has a tenor sound, right? But then down here, this is more of a bass register range. So just really think about the actual registers of the music more than maybe saving a few ledger lines, right? That's the thing that really that still sticks in my craw. I really love Samuel Adler, and I appreciate the work that he put into his monumental state-of-the-art orchestration manual that's used today. But every once in a while, he says some things I really disagree with, and that's one of them, is that the tenor clef is used to save a few ledger lines. And that's not it at all. The tenor clef should be used for the tenor register of a passage, right? So if there's something you were expressing that has a tenor quality in it, then give it to the tenor clef. All right. So that's my little pet peeve. Now back to the evaluation. And to sort of stick with the accompaniment figures, once again, you can actually hear the harp starting to emerge here. So maybe you could stick with pizzicato here and just give the harpist a rest. And then here, maybe have the harpist come out and give the pizzicato a rest, right? I mean, it just depends on how you want to score it. Now, as to the other concern, the melodic development soaring quite high to the uppermost orchestral register, you have basically just solved that almost in a brute force way, which, once again, people people get the wrong idea about what simplicity is in orchestration. Sometimes simplicity can be like a chamber music sort of approach, and it can be more delicate and everything else. Sometimes simplicity can be really an almost brutal approach, right? I'm not saying that this is brutal at all, but it's just really a simple way of solving a problem, and it kind of forces the listener to jump back to less perfumed, less moderated textures. You just really are there, just the listener is just sitting between two elemental forces that have been, kind of stripped of any kind of nicety, right? So just this piccolo soaring above, very, very simple, very direct, and all of the plucking below, almost imitating guitars, right? I just think that that's so great. It's just really just distills things down to their essence. Really lovely. Okay, and then here we've got the strings taking the same basic approach in the same octave, right? And then you are coming from under with your flutes, adding to it, and then the piccolo comes in. So that'll all work fine. Especially kind of coming from something into nothing. But I would just be careful, if you want the line to suddenly thicken up, right, then this is fine. But if you want the sound of the piccolo to sort of feel like it's insinuating itself into the texture slowly, rather than just suddenly starting, then I would say start a few notes back, start piano, and then crescendo to fortissimo. Don't have to worry about the mezzo forte in the middle. So start a few notes back, doubling the violin line, piano, and then crescendo to fortissimo. And then I think you'll get a really great sound. Now, right here, you're pushing the first violins all the way up into a very shrieky kind of a register, and it's totally playable. Like a professional violinist will be able to go up to that E, but how beautiful does that sound, right? You'll notice in a lot of the other arrangements, and including mine, that the the orchestrators involved in this challenge have chosen to drop, like once they get past A, they'll drop their violins down an octave, and then just let the overtones from both first and second violins do the trick of fooling the ear into thinking that the violins are continuing to accompany this piccolo all the way up. So you can do that or not. It doesn't really matter. The other thing to think about is ottava is not needed in a violin part. The violinists are perfectly capable of reading all the way up to a high written E, all the way on those top ledger lines. That is zero problem at all for a professional violinist. And, the little dash of xylophone in here is great. I would say on the previous pages, you sort of held back on the xylophone and you kept it from dominating. I would say continue to do that. Continue to do that. Don't start mezzo forte, start piano, and then you left out a crescendo mark here. But piano, crescendo to forte, right? And just keep it in the background like you did before. Keep that consistency, because I think that that's really, really great. Now, I noticed that you're coming in with a lot of instruments on the downbeat here, alongside the end of this phrase. Okay, so I want you to possibly rethink that. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, and 1. See, like the phrase, as Falla has scored it in his piano score, actually starts here, the next phrase. It does not start on the downbeat. This run up to here is the end of the phrase. Here's the beginning of the new phrase, because you can see the way that these, the rhythmic phrasing here in these motives is really 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, right? It just really starts on 2. 2, 3, 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and then here you have an overlap starting a new phrase. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, right? So yeah, maybe you don't have to come in here with this fortissimo hit in all these other instruments. Maybe you can just let the phrase end on this high note, fortissimo, and then you don't have to worry about the sound of the fortissimo notes washing over into this subito mezzo piano, right? So it just makes the mezzo piano do more work with less effort, right? But I really like the scoring in here. My next criterion in the evaluation criteria list is upper middle register, textural contrast to what happened previously, to avoid a sense of relentlessness. And I think I think you do that here. I think that's nice. I think you could fill things in a little bit more. If you're going to have your oboes doubling some elements that are in here, then it wouldn't hurt to have a little bit more winds right in here, doubling what's going on in the strings, and to allow the strings to get bigger here, right? Rather than just kind of getting stuck in that same upper middle register. I think you can fill things out here a little bit more. Then, there's this one little mistake that you made in here. It's da 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 da, not da 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 da. Right? It's like it's you got to. I think your transcription here slipped a little. You might have dropped that line a little bit, or maybe you wanted to change it. I don't know. So if you intended to change it, that's fine, but maybe just proofread against the score, right, which is telling you something different down here. All right, and then I like the way this ends. The clarinets, the bass clarinet coming in there. I think that's all very fun, and I really like the way that you're showing us where you're headed, right? Not that I'm going to evaluate this, but the last concern in our list is maintaining driving staccato, transitioning smoothly into the next passage, and you were absolutely doing that here. Did you notice in your mock-up that just very cutting sound that you get when you combine clarinets with violins? It just really has this almost sword-like texture, almost like you're sort of slashing through the texture, the sound picture, and it's a very direct sound, and I think that it works beautifully in this context. So, I mean, I think it's a very cool score. I think that I once again I really love the directness and the simplicity of it. So thank you so much for sending in this entry. Just it's really nice to see so much variety, so much difference between people's ideas of what sounds ideal to them, and this is just as valid as anything more complex, right? So great work, Talia. Now let's take a look at the next entry. Now, this next entry from Usman, it just is really well done. I wish that the mock-up sounded better. Maybe this would work. I don't know which exact application this is. If this is I don't think it's Sibelius, but possibly Dorico or I don't know. Some people are getting really, really good results with MuseScore, which used to be, I don't want to say a bit of a joke, but I mean, it used to look very clunky. I used to get entries that were in MuseScore that looked very marginal, and perhaps it's not so much that MuseScore has gotten better as much as people have gotten better at using it. That might be it. So if this is MuseScore, then it looks pretty good. So there's still some problems with conflicts and so on in Grace Notes. However, whatever it is, like the mock-up is not as good as the is not as good as the actual sound of the score, as I can see it just in my own inner ear. So there's really a lot to unpack about this, and that's good because it gives me a lot to talk about. And in different categories than I have been discussing on other scores, right? So it's always great when there's another score to shake things up and to bring something new in. So let's just go right to the evaluation criteria, because I think that will help to reveal a lot of things that are being done really well, and some other things that could use a little work. So, starting off with the whole concern about pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, that's not a concern because you are spreading things around. And then the next problem of possibly a problem of thematic material possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the same way throughout. So you don't have that problem because you are widely varying what happens in the first 4 bars, and then with the return of the same material in the next, bars 9 through 12. It really is refreshing to see how different it is and how much power you add on here, right? So it's almost like the call to the dance, right? And then everybody starts to really shake a leg by the time they get to here, right? So that is a great way of balancing the proportions and to grow the scope of the music. So to just really quickly look at the at the orchestration of it. My only critique would be is that I feel that like first flute and clarinet don't quite, like compared to the force of everything else, that is really kind of hitting these octave Bs with all of the instrumentation in both sections. It just feels a little underpowered. The bum 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 bum, this little part right in here. It just doesn't feel like it's just doing a lot. Now here you're bringing in horn, right? And that is going to be pretty powerful, and that's going to help, but it still is not really adding any force in this top register, right? So like the sound may come from below, but it's not really reinforcing this. I mean, it's reinforcing a little bit with its overtones, but it's not really directly, there's no direct doubling or reinforcement of these upper pitches, right? So that would be, I would kind of wonder if is there some way of bringing in another instrument, maybe the pizzicato chords here could be done a little differently with other members of the string section, and you could have your violins playing divisi octaves, right? That's one possible, or just divisi, or just unison on the same pitches, right? I was thinking divisi octaves with a lower divisi first violins coming in from below, but anyway. So, other than that, it works pretty well. It's a kind of a weird castanet sound in the mock-up, right? So it just has almost like a mechanical clicking sound rather than that really natural, that sort of natural, wonderful sound of the castanet. Some people hate the sound of the castanet, so apologies to you if you do. But now here you're going to a triangle roll. So just to be aware of, like, the triangle roll sounds a bit like a telephone ringing, like, especially at fortissimo, because the player has to really like hit that beater from side to side to get an effective roll. It's slightly violent, right? And that really kind of sounds like a telephone going off the hook, kind of an older style telephone. But of course, like nowadays, telephone rings are really different. So maybe we'll evolve out of that perception in the coming years. But just watch out for that possible similarity. I'll have more to say about the castanets coming up later. But this is really cool. Bringing in the timpani, that just really solid thump down there. Brum! I like this little sort of flam, and the tuba and bass trombone playing in fifths, the trombone sort of picking up the E thirds above, C trumpets hitting that B octave. It's all real cool, and I like the division of duties here in the horns. I think that'll work really great with 1 and 2, 3 and 4. I'm wondering why there couldn't have been like bum 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 in octaves, right? With like first and second playing the octaves, and then maybe like the if you really needed to hear this sounding F, you could throw that in with maybe the trumpet could play one of those, play this note right in here. So about the only problem that you've got right here is that everybody's playing accents all the time, right? So if you want the pizzicato to stick out here and to really be able to compete, you might have to back off on some of the accents on the other instruments, right? Because like all this accented fortissimo brass is going to make it hard to hear the pizzicato here. Now, let's talk about the next issue. The melodic development soaring quite high, the accompaniment figures covering a wide range, all of those other concerns. And if I may say, I think this is the first entry that we've gotten with these sort of swirling scales in our string section. And just such a simple, it's just such a simple convention, right? That the kind of the sense of sort of swirliness and trilling and so on. We've got trills here, and here in the oboe, second oboe part, the clarinet. It just really has this wonderfully cinematic quality to it. It's just really good work. Really enjoyed that. Right. So here you're dividing up the accompaniment figures between your pizzicato middle strings, and you've also got the like I said, this sort of pushing up to right up here to this high F, and yeah, I really like the way that it's supported from below by the trombone. Yum bum 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 bum. Right, and then you're sitting on this B right in here. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it all works really nice. And then, running up to this F. Bum, 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 bum. All right, so here is where, like, you have to be willing to accept that your strings will sound kind of screechy up here. If you're going up to the D and the C, right? Now, that doesn't mean that there is no solution, right? You could have your second violin swirl up to here and then play this an octave lower, and that would somewhat alleviate the focus, the kind of naked screechiness of the naked screechiness. I keep coming up with these really interesting turns of phrase while I am evaluating. Naked screechiness. I've seen that before. So yeah, that if you just come in an octave lower with the second violins, I think that you alleviate some of the problem here of just that really exposed, pinched sound right way up there. Now, a lot of people are solving this problem with adding piccolo, but I think it's interesting how you're not adding piccolo, right? Like, how do you solve a problem like Maria? No, how do you solve a problem like this big arc right here, jumping over and going all the way up to that really high D without piccolo? Yeah, that's so cool. Da 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 pluck. Yeah, neat idea. Now here we've got more trills, and we got more pizzicato dividing up the accompaniment figure. Nice. Okay. Now right here I would just say that, like, this is cool, but there really isn't a follow through. Did you notice that in the mock-up? You can kind of hear the cello going da da da, and then there's this big gap, right? So it doesn't quite follow through jumping the octaves, right? Like da 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 da. I mean, it's like it. I'm not sure that it really jumps, like the focus of the listener really jumps along with the intention of the orchestrator here, right? So maybe there is some other strategy that you could be doing here. Like maybe you could continue on with these lines, just adding octaves above, right? But subtracting, like or stalling the motion right in here, I think it sort of messes with the sense of momentum. But I completely see what you're trying to do here, and that is to build one on the other until finally you are completing the intention here, soaring all the way up to this very, very high note. Now here, if you're starting your divisi here, don't have this rest here, right? So make this rest invisible in your score, because you don't want everybody to be running up here and then all of a sudden half of the strings are not playing on the highest note, right? That's what you're telling them by putting this rest in here. I'm sure that's just an editing thing that you may have missed. All right, but this is all real fun in here. Bum 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 da 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 dum, and like all the swirling going on in the background. So like about the only real problem here, besides some of the other things I mentioned, is just jumping up to this high C and then playing B. So if you're assuming that this is all playing fortissimo, it doesn't. I'm not seeing a dynamic here, but if if you're really assuming that this is still fortissimo, that's fine. Your horn player, your first horn player, should be able to play a high C, fortissimo, accent, then a B, no problem, okay? The problem is that you've got all this really great stuff going on, this wonderfully sort of fervent orchestration, and you've got some complexity in your functions, right? And even though you're not like, I mean, you could be doing more to double some of these pitches in the strings to make them more prominent against the brass. Like you could have flute doubling right here. You could, for some pitches, maybe the oboe could be doubling some of this. Not all of it, obviously, but some of these pitches. Maybe the first bassoon could be doubling the lower ones, and then the first oboe could be doubling the upper pitches in staccato to support the pizzicato. So all of these things, all of these things could help to firm up some of these complex functions, but all of that may be just tossed in the bin if this is so powerful, right? Just reaching up there for that high written C. The highest note that a horn is supposed to play, it's a big note. It really is a big note, and it is going to interfere with the arc of the melody right here. So, you just really have to ask yourself, do you really need that high sounding F? Which will be very penetrating. So, I mean, that is just a problem you have to solve. You can tame it a little bit by giving it to, say, like a trumpet player instead. But I mean, I love the quality of the horn sound, right? So it's just a quandary. Like, you're going to throw that in there, then you really do need to bulk up what's going on in the other parts. You can't just have the first violins, like, and all these other kinds of things. I mean, you're going to have to thicken up some of your other functions if you're going to put in something this penetrating and this powerful. All right, now I really love this with like both clarinets. It just works perfectly, covers that range really, really nicely, and I just love the violins coming in on top. And then the way you end the phrase and then begin the next one, trill, just so cool. This is one of the stronger bits of orchestration. I would just say like if you're going to start this, in the trumpets, the ear is going to say, well, like, what happened when it stops, right? What if you were to come to an end, right? Finish this little phrase on the second beat here, just with a little staccato eighth note, and then the trombones just kind of answer da 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 da, and then maybe you change things around a little bit. Maybe some of these pitches could be played by trumpet, and then the third and fourth horn could be playing the octaves da 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 da, and then you could end with bass trombone blah 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 blah, blah stop, right? So I mean, you started something here. You can't just leave us. You can't just leave us with nothing. We're not that tough. We need to be indulged. By the way, do you want to keep things like, all right, so mezzo piano, mezzo forte, forte, fortissimo, right? So I mean, do you really want things to stay fortissimo? Like, is that going to be the main thing? Could this be forte instead of fortissimo, or just give everybody, like, what if everything was forte? You were just rushing up to a forte, and then this was mezzo forte, and so it could be more of a, more background and less, less penetration into the other functions. I mean, I love the trills and everything else, and this is so cool. And as the you keep the little game going. It's so clever, right? Mezzo piano crescendo. Did you forget the crescendo here? Right? Because suddenly you're going mezzo piano, and then suddenly you're forte here. Right? And then bum bum bum. It does feel like it's leading somewhere. So I would say, covering the criteria of the upper middle register needing some textural contrast. You've got that in spades. Maintaining a driving staccato, also tick that box. Transitioning smoothly into the next passage, it feels like it is leading somewhere. Right? I don't know if you need to go all the way up to fortissimo though. And do you need everything to be accented all the time, right? Because it just really is you could just say marcato at the beginning, and then just you get the attitude of the accent without just really having to just laboriously push the attack of every single note so intensely as this seems to suggest, right? Yeah, but I mean, yeah, just love these little broken octaves right in here. That's all workable. Very, very neat. Yeah, just like a lot of this works. It's like I said before. Like I think with a different sound set, the mock-up would be even more convincing, and a lot of people would be seeing or hearing what I hear when I look at this and say, "Wow, what a great piece of orchestration." So really nice work, Usman. I just really enjoyed this. I appreciate you. You've been in the group a long, long time. You've contributed to it in ways people do not even understand sometimes. Behind the scenes, people may not know this, but Usman's Beethoven, his Beethoven cycle, the Beethoven sonatas has helped me to train dozens of people over on Patreon in the in our audiation course, like learning to look at a score and just hear it or understand what it's saying to you without having to hear any kind of mock-up or audio backup. Also, Usman, he played the piano part to the piano example for one of our orchestration challenges. All right, go back and check it out. His playing is just really, really awesome. So anyway, so thank you for all of that. Thank you for coming back and participating in this very strong entry, and I just wish you the best growth for your career and continued happiness as a creative musician. I just think what you're bringing to the community is really valuable, and I kind of don't get a chance to sit down and thank somebody who's put this much work into it. So thank you for that. It's I people are doing things all the time to make the Orchestration Online community better, right? And I always appreciate it. Do not think that I'm not aware of it and I'm not appreciative of it, right? I really, really do thank you for that. So now, on to our sixth and last entry for this really remarkably interesting and captivating group of entries. All right, Andrew, what a great way to end this group of evaluations on a highly symphonic note. Really, I mean, this really is what I would consider to be symphonism. Like it's voices working together, right? The not just playing at the same time, not just playing against each other, not just playing in multiple voices, right? So I'm going through all the checklist, polyphony and so on. But also like the idea of voices supporting each other and working together and everything else. And I think actually on that level, I think I have a lot that I can help you out with, and to sort of make your scoring a little clearer and more effective. Now I'm going to teach you a little trick, okay? Like starting off. So I'm going to select this. You're using Sibelius, which is cool. So you're going to be, let's say you're going to be entering like some expression text, right? So here I am. I've got my thumb sitting on the command or control key, and I am going to reach over with my pointer, and I'm going to hit the E on my keyboard. Now, instead of just lifting my fingers and typing the the expression text, I'm going to leave my thumb sitting on the command or control key, right? Because I'm lazy. And my laziness is rewarded with a beautifully engraved forte sign, right? So just by being lazy, just by letting your thumb continue to sit, you can type any kind of expression text and end up with beautifully engraved, much more readable expression text. All right, so it's just the simplest. It's the simplest keyboard shortcut, and once you learn that, there you have absolutely no excuse to be sending me or anybody else who can score read a score with these wimpy, undernourished dynamic marks. Sorry, I'm not putting your score down. I'm just, it's just so easy when you think about it. Thumb on the command or control key, hit the E, just leave your thumb sitting on that command or control key as you type FF, right? Boom. All right, so here endeth the lesson. So now let's get back to the coaching. Our first concern, like in music of this kind, is to really make sure that the functions are differentiated, right? So I'm going to be talking about that a little bit as we go through the evaluation criteria, but the first thing that I'm going to do is just to like look at your harp scoring, right? So right here, this is invisible in the mock-up, and it will be invisible in real life, IRL, right? So you've got all of these much, much stronger instruments than the harp. Timpani roll enough, just all by itself, the timpani roll and the suspended cymbal will just blot out anything the harp is doing. So if you want the harpist to have any chance of having kind of an upward motion in here, you should make it a big glissando and maybe start on the second beat so more strings are covered in less time, right? So maybe start right here and right? Might be a much more audible kind of a thing. And then here, like these octaves, they're just not going to come through. Look, you got the right idea here, like a big rolled chord. Unfortunately, you're doing the same thing pizzicato being played by about at least 60 other string instruments. So against that, this one single little harp has got no chance, right? So thinking of like the division being 16, 14, 12. Sorry. 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, right? So that's 60 players. So, if with all of the strings rolling, except I guess the double basses, then the harp has just got no chance, right? They're unless you were to put the roll much higher and you were to balance out, like if this were mezzo forte and this were fortissimo, then you might hear some harp on top. If the registers of the rolls were kept separate. Okay, but I mean the harp just really has no chance with trumpets and horns absorb harp timbre, like they just really it's like maybe a single horn playing along with a harp in like a beautiful duo, like playing melodically along with harp, will not be a problem, but especially loud multiple notes on horns. And then, of course, just like the trumpets being so loud. Sorry, I don't want to harp on it too much. Now here, like you're heading into a place where, like maybe with some balancing, the harp, like keep the harp at fortissimo, and then just back everybody the heck off to like maybe piano. Then like you're, or mezzo piano. Then the harp has got a chance, right? So, but otherwise, I would say just leave the harp out. If you can't provide really soft, much softer places for it to contribute to the music. I'd say it's just, it's basically just doubling things that are going on in other parts, right? And then, like, just the concern here is if you're giving the harpist too much responsibility, then the function that they're covering disappears, right? So, better to have that function covered by instruments that will really come through, right? Like maybe the clarinet's like playing this like in staccato or something like that, with a little bit of support maybe from like say Divisi pizzicato violas, and you could give this stuff to your second player, right? And then have your second players and have them play Divisi, or just like this note could be covered by the firsts, this could be covered by the seconds, and then you could make your violas play pizzicato lines like this, doubled by clarinets, and then you have the accompaniment figure covered, right? All right, so not to belabor it too much, let's go into the evaluation criteria now. So there is, in the list, I have to mention it even if it is not a problem, and that is pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano score. That's not a situation that's a big concern here. You're not limiting yourself to the scope, to the scope of pitches that are in the piano score. That's great. Thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the exact same way twice. Well, that is also not a big concern. I mean, you're doing a lot of the same things in the winds, but you're changing the context of the strings drastically, and you are adding a huge amount of oomph from the lower end here. This kind of almost waltz-like scoring for your lower brass and bassoons as well. So, I think that's a very effective way of shaking things up, right? Changing from just like almost the sort of imitation guitar right in here to just really direct, furious kinds of scoring. Okay, so just looking at that scoring, there are a few problems in this. Now, you might have noted that there's something a little underpowered about the yata dun dun, right? And some of that is just the mock-up. It's just and some of that is the dynamics, right? You're giving your pizzicato fortissimo, and I understand that balance, right in there, right? It's the intention is to balance the pizzicato against the winds and brass, right? So that they're not, it's not overwhelmed. Great idea. However, like maybe you could back off on some of the accents and then just have the accents come in on the melodic part, right? So it's loud enough already. It does not, you don't really need to throw in the accents, but bum 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 bum, and then throw in the accents. Bum, right? I think that might be a better approach right in there, and perhaps there could be even just a little bit more weight on there, like A2 trumpets. I think might work really, really great. And it's too bad that your cellos are really, really kind of tied up with this, because doubling the bassoons right in here, A2 trumpets, then the overtones from both groups sort of progressively add more strength to these upper bits of melody and keep them from getting too swallowed, right? And then, right in here, like it's not as big of a problem because you've got your upper strings joining in, and that kind of helps everything make a lot of sense, right? So that's not a big issue. I really love this big solid low E, and I think that you could, I almost feel like you could be going low E here. See, you've got this roll. What if this D, instead of down here, were up an octave, right? And you had D and E up, and then like a low E down, and you could follow the motion here of the trombones and tuba with timpani going boom boom, right? And then you don't have to jump down so far. It sort of feels a little strange, like throwing in the low D. It seems to sort of pull apart the direction of the music a little bit in the lower strings and lower heavy brass. Sorry about all the screaming and yelling, hearing that you might be hearing in the background. My son is an avid Minecraft player, and he's on Discord right now, shouting at his friends and having fun. So I just have to put up with that because it's the weekend. Sorry, folks. So anyhow, but it could be amusing actually. So yeah, so otherwise, I don't really see a big problem with any of this. I think it all works fine. You do not need X note heads in concert scoring. Okay, so that's more of a crossover scoring kind of a thing, to have X note heads on your percussion parts. So just have standard, standard note heads. It really shouldn't make any difference, right? And the same thing with the triangle. It's really cool to have the tambourine playing this other shaped triangle, but none of that is necessary, and ultimately is just possibly dangerous to your music in the fact that there is a chance that it could be misread. And then we're having this sort of sagging stuff going on here to activate a different timbre or a different tone in the sound set. So maybe just do the old 2 bass drum notation here to change instruments on the same line, right? And I think it's just easier, right? So like you do here, right? So do 2 bass drum here, have the bass drum timbre with the note on the right, on the line rather than below it. Okay, all right. So so now let's talk about the alternating sections, the melodic development soaring high, the accompaniment figures covering a wide range issues, right? So all of those things. This is really kind of cool that like you're sort of keeping the melodic development like down more, right? It's all totally playable. And then you just have a little bit of flute and bassoon coming in here, and cello as well. I think that works really great, and of course trumpet and tuba. That's really really fun. I think that it works great, but once again, like it's just so big that you reduce to just throwing in a harp glissando, and you may feel that that's cliche, right? So anyway, but it would work, right? Is the point, right? Like this doesn't work dynamically. Right, it's invisible, right? But to continue on with analyzing how the melody is worked out here, oboes and bassoons, and then the other winds coming in here, right? And I like this here, the bassoons and lower brass and lower strings. I think that works really really great. Okay. You're starting to run into a problem here, and the problem will crop up again. And you'll notice it in the mock-up as well. This just really feels kind of weak, doesn't it? Why is that? It's because of this. You have your tenuto accent, right? And then also you're ending on fortissimo at exactly the same time that the melody. Like you want to finish this. I understand you want to go bien bum 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 bum, and you want to sort of have a completing note. But the problem is that completing the phrase on the downbeat of the next bar is killing the entrance of the melody, right? So like the melody has to sort of emerge from this, and we just don't get really the context of what happened until we're maybe a couple beats in, right? Dun, 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 dun. It's just not a very strong beginning to the melody. And of course, the melody is underpowered compared to some parts. Like you've got your clarinets louder than your melodic statement right in here. And I'm not sure, like, I think you mean A2, right? Right in here. So 2 players at once. Now, right in here, I would just say, like, maybe it's enough just to put in tenuto rather than tenuto accent, right? Because it really is drowning out the the melody, and then right in here, like this kind of doubling of the clarinets is also just too loud, right? So the ending, the ultimate effect here is that you don't really hear the melody as a prominent element until about right here. So I think you need to rethink this, right? I love the glockenspiel coming in here, though, right? Maybe there's a way of just backing your accompaniment figures way the hell off, having the harp take care of it, having this be more of a background element, bringing out the melody, right? And that way you've got some chance for the harp and the glockenspiel, which is a little more delicate than the average instrument. You got those things have a chance, and then just come in back in here with full strength, going towards the end of this phrase. Okay, so we're getting into our next particular concern of the upper middle register being, possibly relentless in this section. But, you continue to widen the scope. But, here we're getting into that problem again of accompaniment elements overwhelming melodic elements. So how many instruments are playing the melody here? We've got the first violins and we've got clarinets, right? And they're playing mezzo forte, right? And we have our horns coming in here, forte, mezzo forte, then piano, right? So you're sort of trying to follow kind of a terrace dynamic underneath this diminuendo, but it's just too strong, right? And this yum bum 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 in the cellos is stronger than the melody, right? So, and the melody, this dun dun dun, is nowhere in the in the winds in terms of doubling. So, I think you need to rethink how you're supporting the melody in the winds right in here. I don't think that it's cutting it the way that you've got it here, and this will be overwhelmed by what's going on here in the middle strings too, right? Because it's just because of the way that it's scored. I mean, I think this is really clever right in here. The viola supporting the clarinets here in the middle, and then this right in here changing into an accompaniment strategy, right? But I just feel that the melody needs to be way stronger right in here. But I mean, leading to this bit of coolness right in here, there's so many really awesome things. I'm pointing out problems, but that doesn't mean that the orchestration is wrong or boring or anything like that. It's really, really great. It just needs some adjusting. So I really love this here. There's ya da 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 da. You've got your double reed actors right in here with the flute coming in on top. I think that it would hurt nothing whatsoever to have the strings starting with the oboes right in here, and it would give some well-needed weight. The same thing here, to have the cellos starting off with the harmonized part from below. Okay, and then you adding elements and so on later on works really, really great. And the trill and this really soft brass in the back. I think that's really, really fine work. And then like we're seeing this lead somewhere, right? So the remaining concerns about maintaining a driving staccato and transitioning smoothly to the next passage, those are all all of those concerns are allayed, right? And as we can sort of hear from the kind of tail end of your mock-up, you do have some strong ideas for the next section, and it sort of makes me think, well, geez, if it's all that strong and you put that much thought into it, it would have been great to hear, like, maybe you could have taken on sections A and B. By the way, this is section A. You put a section A on the next. You put a rehearsal mark A on the next section. I know it's maybe it's a petty little thing, but just maintain the same rehearsal marks, and it just makes it easier on everybody analyzing all the scores, right? So even though, you would not normally put a rehearsal mark at the beginning of the score, but that's just for the organizational purposes of this challenge. All right, so, but just to get back to what I was saying before, I think that it would be great to see you take on 2 sections or more. And actually, like with this kind of approach, it makes me very curious to to think about what you would do with the next challenge, 2022 challenge, where the music is going to be of a completely different character. It's going to be, in some ways, like nothing we've done before. There will be some similarities with a couple of other entries, but it's actually, in terms of its, the heart and soul of the piece, and and the huge challenges that it is going to represent in how to orchestrate it effectively. I mean, it's going to be a challenge for me. I'm looking at it and I'm still thinking, I know that this needs to be the next selection for next year's entry. How am I going to do this? So I would really love to see you take a crack at it too, Andrew, and pretty much everybody in this just really wonderful, it's like a treasure chest, just like opening it up and looking at all the jewels inside, right? All of the great ideas that everybody had. So I really appreciate that, everybody, the work you put into it and the way that it elevates this whole challenge to have such a strong collection of works. So thanks, everybody. It really does, help me to, continue to come back to these website entries and just to see the quality and unique ideas and effort and so on. Just very, very inspiring. So I will let you all go with big thanks to all the viewers, all the supporters, all the people on Patreon who are coming over here to the website entries and giving people feedback. That is priceless. That is just the spirit of the community that, I'm not seeing in any other community out there, in on the internet. So you guys are awesome. I'll see you soon with more of these group evaluations and also more Patreon evaluations, the individual scores, really, really soon.